This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sirr.
And you're all very welcome to this morning's show. Well, welcome back everyone after the summer. I hope you've been having a really great time of reading. This is our first Books for Breakfast for the start of the new season, and we're really looking forward to chatting to you about books and also talking to writers.
Yeah, very true. So we'll be in conversation today with Dwyer, Hickey, whose new book, Our London Lives, is just out. And we'd also be ourselves talking about books that have mattered to us and that we've enjoyed over the summer.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm really interested to hear, Peter, what you've been reading. I have to say as well that we both have been thoroughly enjoying Dwyer Hickey's new novel, Our London Lives. We had the pleasure of reading a proof copy of the book, and it certainly will not disappoint you. It's a really great read. But we've decided we won't put Christine through the rigours of the Toaster Challenge, where traditionally on Books for Breakfast, we ask a guest to talk about a book or writer they love for as long as it takes to make a slice of toast. We've always had great fun doing that, haven't we, Peter?
We have indeed, and so we're going to kind of put the challenge up to ourselves this morning. I have a great slice of bread here. In fact, maybe two slices of bread we might need, and I'm willing to put them in the toaster. If you want to talk about a book that you've loved, and then later on I might do the same. So if we want to go ahead, I've got the toaster ready, and I could put the first slice of bread down now. If you want to go.
1, 2, 3. Oh my God, Peter, you're really putting me up to the challenge. I wasn't expecting that. Well, actually, there is a book that I've been reading. It's called Forbidden Notebook. It was written by Alba de Cespedes. She lived from 1911 through to 1997, and she was a best-selling Italian-Cuban novelist, poet and screenwriter. Actually, Peter, you gave this to me as a gift for my birthday, and I put it aside because I'm one of those precarious creatures who doesn't immediately read a book that I've been given by somebody else. And then finally I opened it in the summer and I went, oh my God, why wasn't I reading this book all along? Her own life, Alba de Cespedes, was like something out of a novel itself. She was the granddaughter of the first president of Cuba, and she was raised in Rome. She was married at 15, can you imagine? And she was a mother by 16. And she began her writing life at the age of 20, just after her divorce. So already quite a dramatic life story. She worked as a journalist in the 1930s, but she also took on a really active part in the Italian partisan struggle. And in fact, she was twice jailed for her anti-fascist struggles. But after the fall of fascism, she became a best-selling novelist. So this book of hers that you can see, Peter, at the breakfast table, Forbidden Notebook, it was reissued by Pushkin Classics in I'm in the wrong century, in 2023. And it's an absolute gem. There's no mistake that it's translated by Anne Goldstein because, as many of you know, she's Elena Ferrante's translator. And it has a very similar prose style to Ferrante. There's kind of a cool, intelligent sophistication to the writing that I love. Ferrante herself has said of de Cespedes, when I'm writing, I confine myself occasionally to reading books that keep me company, not as entertainment, but as solid companions. And I call them books of encouragement, like those of Alba de Cespedes. So Ferrante, she really thinks highly of de Cespedes. But to get to the story of Forbidden Notebook without giving away too much, it tells the story of Valeria Casati. She's a housewife in Rome in the 1950s, and she buys a diary. And it becomes a secret thing. The secrecy of the notebook adds a great tension to this book. She's filled with fear that her husband and grown children who live with her in a small apartment in Rome might find this diary. And so there's loads of sections where she's hiding it here and hiding it there. And she's afraid that they're going to read her private thoughts. So where to hide the notebook is an ongoing problem, but also so are the revelations in the diary, because as the diary continues, we as the readers are plunged deeper into her world of mother, daughter, wife, and nearly lover. This is the exciting bit of the director of her company that she works for. It's about work. It's about being a mother. It's about being a wife. It's a radical book, I think. Radical also because I think the diary device makes the private public. And it's the first person narrative in this book that I think kind of pushes it along with a great force. What else can I say about the book? Well, Valeria is laughed at by her family for even wanting to write, but she persists. And in the end, she realises she must stop the diary in order to save herself. In the Italian version of the novel, the writer Nadia Terranova says the genius of Alba de Cespedes in this book is shattering the illusion that writing is a place of refuge and replacing it with the certainty that it is a place that always both pollutes and sabotages us. As Valeria tells her daughter towards the end, save yourself, you who can do it. I think that's really interesting, actually, that in the end she has to stop the diary to save herself. So I would recommend that everybody who's listening reads Forbidden Notebook by Alba de Cespedes. In many ways, it is a challenging read, but it's a really radical novel. And as a reader, I feel so lucky to have read it. But I would just like to end, I hope the toast isn't too burnt, but I would like to end by just reading a tiny section from the first diary entry, which is titled November the 26th, 1950, and it describes Valeria going into a tobacco shop on a Sunday to buy a notebook. It was actually, believe it or not, prohibited at the time to do that on a Sunday, one of those strange Italian laws. But again, that adds to the secrecy of having this forbidden notebook. The tobacco shop was crowded. Waiting my turn with the cigarette money ready, I saw a stack of notebooks in the window. They were black, shiny, thick, the type used in school, in which, before even starting it, I would immediately write my name excitedly on the first page, Valeria. I would also like a notebook, I said, digging in my purse to find some more money. But when I looked up, I saw that the tobacconist had assumed a severe expression to tell me I can't, it's forbidden. He explained that an officer stood guard at the door every Sunday to make sure that he sold tobacco only, nothing else. I was alone now in the shop. I need it, I said. I absolutely need it. I was speaking in a whisper, agitated, ready to insist, plead. So he looked around, then quickly grabbed a notebook and handed it to me across the counter, saying, "Hide it under your coat." I kept the notebook under my coat all the way home. I was afraid it would slide out, fall on the ground, while the porter was telling me something or other about the gas pipes. I felt flushed when I turned the key to open the door to the apartment. I started to sneak off to my room, but I remembered that Michaela was still in bed. Meanwhile, Morella was calling me. Ricardo asked, "Did you buy the paper, Mama?" I was agitated, confused. I was afraid I wouldn't manage to be alone while I took off my coat. I'll put it in the closet, I thought. No, Morella's always going in there to get something of mine to wear. A pair of gloves, a blouse, the night table. Michaela always opens it. The desk is now occupied by Ricardo. I considered that in the entire house, I no longer had a drawer or any storage space that was still mine. I proposed to assert my rights starting that day. In the linen closet, I decided. Then I recalled that every Sunday, Morella gets out a clean tablecloth when she's setting the table. I finally threw it in the rag bag in the kitchen. I'd only just closed the bag when Morella came in and said, "What's wrong, Mama? You're all red in the face." "It must be the coat," I said, taking it off. "It's warm out today." It seemed to me that she might say, "That's not true. It's because you've hidden something in the bag." In vain, I tried to convince myself that I had done nothing wrong. Again, I heard the tobacconist's voice warning me, "It's forbidden." So, Peter, I hope the toast isn't too burnt there.
Well, I should say we got a kind of special new toaster, and it has a number of settings, and there's a slow book setting on it, which is very useful sometimes, or a slow burn setting. So when a book is particularly interesting, but may not be a minute or two, we can set it to that, and we did that this morning, and it worked very well. Yeah,
that's quite interesting, Peter. Thank you very much for doing that. So now, Peter, I am turning to you, and you are going to have to rise to the toaster challenge. What have you been reading? I actually have another slice of toast, and I'm going to put it down now. It's in the toaster, and I'm going to count you in. You are going to give us a surprise treat this morning, Peter, sir. 1, 2, 3, and off you go.
Sure. Well, I mean, I found myself stuck firmly in the past for something of writing at the moment. The past as in 2,000 years ago in late Republican Rome, in the company of Catullus and Claudia Metelli and Julius Caesar and all of those, as the Republic is falling apart and being replaced by the Empire, and Empire poets like Virgil and Horace. I suppose I've always been a bit obsessed with Catullus. I did a long set of variations on his work in a book that came out some years back, called The Thing Is, where I transplanted him to contemporary Dublin. But now I've gone back to him again writing about him, translating him into prose, and a couple of versions of poems too, and kind of homages more than translations to him. And I think, I think it has something to do with our relationship with the past. I think I'm interested in how we relate to certain parts of the past more than others, and how some writers seem close to us while others are kind of distant. Like how Catullus seems like a neighbour, like our contemporary, while, say, the author of Beowulf might as well be on another planet, I sometimes think. So I'm interested in various aspects of the work. The furious, white-hot, obscene poet, I suppose, damning his frenemies and enemies. The poet in love with the older woman that we know was Clodia Metelli, the high society Roman woman, that Cicero famously insinuated was having an affair with her own brother, who was the plebeian tribune Publius Clodius Pulcher as in the beautiful. And Catullus's best friend was also having an affair with her, so life was tough, and his fury reflects that. So it's one of the things that it's made even still an awkward poet for people to handle. And there are legions of stories about censored Catullus, the one that's the poet that's too hot to handle. I mean, we can't have that poem, or we can't have this one, or we can't put that one in the anthology. Think of the students, think of the shock. Think how they're going to be triggered. I mean, in a way, he was made to be Bowdlerized. I mean, Jay Cates in the Harvard Review Online, he tells the story of one irate reader who he goes into a shop and he comes across a book of his poems in an Indiana bookshop, and he writes then to the president of Purdue University. He says, "This book was named Carmina of Catullus. I think it's one of the filthiest books I've ever had the misfortune to see. I would cite especially poem number 97 on page 158 of this book for you to read and see if you don't think it's just pure filth." And he also wrote to the governor of the state, who replied with a sympathetic, "Oh yes, better such tripe died untranslated." And the thing is about that, of course, it was a close thing, because he only survived by accident. I mean, the poems disappeared for nearly 1,000 years and were only recovered, in the Middle Ages in a copy. A copy turned up, which again went missing, but luckily it had been copied again in the meantime. So again, I have to speed now, kind of towards the end. But I mean, imagine what a loss it would have been if he hadn't survived. I think, one of the things that makes him enjoyable for me is his own sheer enjoyment in his poems, a sense of a mind, if you like, deliciously at play, which again is something new in the world at the time he's writing. I mean, it's a poem I love that celebrates spending the day with a friend who's also a poet, something that we, in our kind of solitary and individualistic era, I think could never imagine doing, because we don't really work collectively, or at least not when we're writing poems, I think. So I think I really like that kind of self-conscious enjoyment, that relishing the act of arranging words on paper with metre and words and sounds calling back and forth to each other, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to read that, and then what's actually the very first poem in his Carmina, which is the kind of dedicatory poem, which a lot of people would be familiar with. So here goes. Just two examples of poems by Catullus. The game, Catullus. It's one of those days that never happened, but did. You came over and we stayed in all day, just the two of us, batting words across the table, drinking Tuscan wine, and when that was gone, drinking whatever we could find. I remember the paper everywhere on the floor, in the bin, scooped out again, unscrunched. I think I ironed one and read it from a chair. I never laughed so hard or much, nor ever met anyone half so brilliant, half so true as you, nor saw or felt how much and more could yet be done. Did we eat or rest or walk the dog or hunt the mouse? I think you left. I think I tossed or wandered through the house and prayed for dawn so I could see you again. And lying down and worn to the bone, I got up or fell down to make this poem or something like it, something fine enough for both of us to sign. Right there in your hall, I remember the tiles, I remember your eyes, your unslept smile. It must have been yesterday. And again this morning, that fury that knows there can be no tomorrow, the two of us burning. Dedicatory. Cui dono lepidum novum libellum. Catullus. You're the only one who gets it, gets me, who believed I could produce a book like this. You are my guide. I carry your books like talismans or a stone in the shoe to complicate the path. If I can match you, I'll sleep in peace. This book, small gift, I dedicate to you. What's the span of perishable words? a week, a month. Let me pretend 100 years from now, tired eyes scan before they sleep a page or two. Not much I can do. You're out of my hands, little book. Bags packed, world before you. But sometimes think back. Remember, who bought the ticket? Who opened the door?
Whoa, I don't think the toast was burnt there at all. So thank you very much, Peter, for that lovely, really evocation of the work of Catullus, the filthiest book. I like that. So we were talking there about Alba de Cespedes and the powers of Catullus. And of course now we are very excitingly moving on to talk to Christine Dwyer Hickey, superb novelist, whose new novel, Our London Lives, is just being launched this very evening.
She was 18 years old and had known few people in her life so far. There'd been her grandmother, her grandfather, the come-and-go farmhands who helped out on their small holding, the occasional student at harvest time. There was a vicar until the parish church closed down, and a handful of children from the small Protestant school that had also closed down the year after she finished going there. There was a Catholic priest from a parish 12 miles away who came into the pub to get drunk and sing songs. Once there had been a mother who still wandered into her head from time to time. She knew the girl in the shop where she bought her grandfather's snuff and his weekend newspapers. She knew the owner of the pub and his sour-faced sister who ran the post office. She knew the busman who waved at her from his big green bus that brought people up to Newry or down to Dublin City, where she sometimes accompanied her grandfather in case he fell off the wagon and needed someone to help him to get back on the bus. There was the main street and the river, the church spire and the dairy. There was the hairdresser in the front room of a cottage where her grandmother got permed once in a while. There was the old hay barn that sold second-hand tractor tyres. The green postbox on one corner and the cream and green phone box on the other. The big blue statue of a Holy Mary on the fork in the road, a wreath of dirty plastic roses at her feet. There was the graveyard on the hill at the side of the big Catholic church. And a small graveyard behind the closed-down Protestant church where, if she turned her head sideways to look through the railings, she could see her mother's name etched into a pale grey stone. There was no sawdust on the floor of Mrs. Oak's pub. The ceilings were much higher, the rooms way wider, and the array of labels and bottles seemed to go on forever, even in the compact back lounge. The village pub with its low ceiling and squinty windows had once been the centre of her world. Yet no sooner had she stepped her foot in here than it began to shrink in her mind. Within a few days, hardly anything remained, apart from the memory of sound or sensation. An old man spit as it hit the fire, or the lazy sound of the ticking clock and the shushing of her grandmother's sweeping brush. She could remember the feel of the owner's big hairy arm digging into her belly when he lifted her up to the pump, and the grunt he gave when he did that, and the musty smell of him behind her. And she remembered too the gush of porter as it made its way out, and the lazy way it curled around the inside of the glass, and how, if she stared right into it for a few precious seconds, everything disappeared. There was too much light in the main bar of Mrs. Oak's pub. It came at her no matter which way she turned. In the morning, when she folded back the shutters from the big front windows, it fell on top of her in a great big slab. In the evening, it bounced out of the backdrop mirrors and speared down from the chandelier. All day long, it zipped and winked along the rows of different shaped glasses that she polished and repolished with her constant hands. And there was too little light everywhere else. The further back into the house you went, the dimmer it became. By the time you went past the small lounge, the office and storeroom, down the long corridor to the porch that brought you out to the yard, you could hardly see a stim in front of you. The same thing with the stairs. The first flight was fine, but after that the light diminished. Until the last flight, when the stairs narrowed up to her room into a wedge of solid darkness. There were light switches on the walls of the landings. She had felt them with her hand, but they had all been taped over. Even in the middle of the day, it rattled her nerves to go up there.
And that was Christine Dwyer Hickey, award-winning novelist and short story writer, reading from her new and 10th novel, Our London Lives, just published by Atlantic Books. And I saw as well, it got a brilliant review in The Guardian last week as well. This new novel is being launched at Hodges Figgis Dublin tonight, Thursday the 5th of September at 6 p.m, with post-launch drinks in Neary's, I hear. So we'll definitely all come along, Christine. But if anyone's listening, do come. It's going to be a great evening. And it's a really exciting day for you too, Christine. Congratulations. You're very welcome back to the breakfast table, to Books for Breakfast.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Enda.
Great to have you here. And I have to say, I really enjoyed hearing you read that excerpt, Christine. The opening section of the book, it really drew me in as a reader. It settles you, I think, into the lonely life of Millie, a young Irish girl in 1979 London. And circumstances have forced her to leave home, haven't they? And to leave Ireland. She finds herself as a barmaid in the formidable, it has to be said, Mrs. Oak's bar in London. And I know this novel started out as a short story called Home. It was a Christmas story, actually, which I first heard on the BBC, their Short Works, wasn't it? BBC4's Short Works.
That's right.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, having written it as a short story initially, was it kind of your novelist's intuition that made you think, oh, hold on a minute now, this short story could develop, it could become a novel?
Yeah, initially I had started the novel with Pip. And when the short story was broadcast, a friend of mine got in touch with me and she said to me, oh, you have to use that. You absolutely have to use that. And there's something that happens at the end of that chapter, I don't want to give it away, that she felt was very significant and something that I feel very strongly about too. So it's something very sad. But anyway, so I changed it. I pulled Millie out. She was already in the book, I have to say, and the pub was already in the book, but not that particular set of circumstances, or not the writing was different. The writing was different. She'd come to work in the pub by a different manner. And I decided to do that, to change it. And I started. It meant, it's a bit like dominoes. It meant that there was a slight alteration in the rhythm of the novel. But I wasn't that far into it, I think.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Yeah, because there's a wonderful atmosphere at the beginning of the book. And I just remember being really struck by that short story when I heard it. I think it's wonderful that, as you said, the rhythm changed and it became something different. Yeah. So it's always of interest, I think, to listeners to hear how did it come about initially.
For anybody who knows this podcast, you were our very first guest on the podcast back in 2020 in the middle of lockdown for your last book, The Narrow Land. And that's a kind of it's like a forensic examination in a way of the life and marriage of the painter Edward Hopper, set in Cape Cod in the 50s. Our London Lives, by contrast, it's a lot more expansive. Like, it's moving across all these different time periods in the lives of its main characters. And I was wondering, was that a different kind of challenge for you as a writer compared to that?
Well, they're all challenges. They all are challenges. And I just begin with, once I have the location nailed, then I feel I let the book sort of happen. I didn't plan the Narrow Land to be the way it was, and I didn't really plan for this to pan out the way it did. I certainly didn't expect it to be quite this big or this long, but what we write is the length it's going to be. And yeah, but it's always a challenge. It's never easy. It's always a challenge.
You mentioned there London, and you said actually about once you've got the location, you're happy. But the title is Our London Lives, and it does suggest that the London part of the equation, it's a really significant factor, isn't it? So Millie, for instance, in her free time, she walks through London. The sense of history greatly affects her, I think it's fair to say. And London becomes a really important and vital character in the book, the streets, the atmosphere. So what drew you to setting your novel there? Is it a place that you know well, that you've lived in? Were you a barmaid once in London?
I was a barmaid for a short time. After I left school one summer, I became a barmaid in that pub. I use the inside of the pub, and the outside still exists, but it's greatly changed now. So I always wanted to set a novel in London, but I was sort of daunted by those who have gone before me. And I felt that you needed to live there for a long time, or you needed to be from London. And, you're looking at Dickens and Martin Amis and all sorts of different writers that have really, really understand the city. And I didn't want to sort of half get it. I wanted to really get it. So anyway, I think it was about about 2015, I was in the Abbey Theatre and I was watching at the T.S. Eliot lectures, and I was watching Fiona Shaw, and she was, you couldn't say reciting, but it's sort of like a performance of The Wasteland. And I started to think to myself, well, hold on, Eliot was a stranger in London and he wasn't there all that long when he started to write The Wasteland. And so maybe it's a good idea to be a stranger, to be an outsider. You just come at it from that perspective. So everything is new because outsiders see different things. And I remembered when I was working in that bar in London, you used to get very long breaks. You know, the English are very obedient about their drinking. They're not like the Irish where you'd have to, you know, spend an hour getting them out the door. They would come up with their glasses and go when it was time to go. So you had about 3 hours, 2.5 hours anyway to yourself every day. And I remembered wandering down the road and turning a corner and suddenly coming upon St. Paul's and just seeing that these places that I'd only seen in postcards or on the TV or something, and realising the immensity of the city. And so I just gave that to Millie and to the two of them, both of the characters. There's only two perspectives, and that's Millie and Pip, and it alternates between both of their viewpoints. That's how I write. And that's how I just kind of gradually got it. And then it also occurred to me that London is vast and it's varied, but it's also the river that is like its spine. And then it's a little series of villages, really. So I just took a few villages and got to know them very well and moved there for 4 months. So that really helped. Yeah, that really helped.
But that moment, that epiphany in the Abbey Theatre, it's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, you think of Louis MacNeice, I think he wrote one of the best poems about Dublin, and he came from the north.
Yeah.
So it's often the outsider coming in. So yeah, that's great. I love that idea of the expansiveness of the city suddenly hitting you as well. Yeah.
You mentioned like the two main characters, obviously Millie and Pip, and they overlap throughout the novel. I mean, Millie again is such a strong character, but she's very vulnerable as well, with her own kind of sadness about her, and Pip has lots of demons as well to deal with, but together they have a bond that kind of crosses decades. And they meet at the pub where Millie works, and they become kind of involved. But you've chosen to tell their story. There's a lot of shifts of time and perspective. And I'm just thinking again, was that you mentioned that the viewpoints changed, but also the time kind of changes back and forth. So we're back and forth across kind of decades. And I was wondering again, was that an important kind of part of was that an important decision in terms of putting it together?
Yeah, that just kind of came to me. I mean, it's not all my books, I think, are the same. I'm really interested in what goes on inside people's heads, and where they are and what has happened to them informs the people that we become, and the chance in life and the different outside things that can happen outside that can affect our whole lives and change our whole lives. I also like to play with time. It's not the first occasion that I've done this. I like episodic things because, something happens and you meet, when you haven't, like tonight I would meet loads of people I haven't seen since the last launch, or people that I only see at funerals or launches. So I have to keep writing books if I want to see them alive. But you see little changes in them and you don't know quite what happened since you've seen them last. And I'm interested in that. I just came out of the structure that we only see Pip from Millie's point of view, from her perspective, as it happens, even though it's written in that part is written in the past tense. And him, we only see Millie from his perspective in memory. And even though his part is written in the present tense. And it was just kind of to make it more interesting for me, I think, to write, to keep me into certain rules,
It's a big book and you had to keep yourself on target there. Pip or Philip and his brother Dom, I thought that they were fascinating characters, but they're very different as brothers. Like Dom is a musician, he's a successful trumpet player and he's much sought after. Pip is a boxer, a kind of who could have been a contender, as it were. But his life is skewed, isn't it, by a number of things, alcohol being one of the main factors. I was thinking, again, where did these characters come from? You might just say they just emerged, but how did they come into your mind? The idea of the boxer and the idea of, his brother, the musician, and what drew you to tell their stories?
Well, I think a long, long time ago, I wanted to write a play about somebody who lived in a sort of cave, a cave type of situation, and based on the Plato story. And it was just kind of shadows in my head about it. And the play, I saw Owen Rose being a boxer in it, and I saw Kathy Belton as being a barmaid. And then that didn't happen. COVID happened. I got sick and I wrote The Narrow Land, and COVID happened. And then I thought, I really don't need the stress of writing another play, because it's a very, very I wrote one before, very, very stressful experience. So when I came back to this fella, he had changed shape and she had changed shape, but the actual roles that they had in life were similar. And the fact that Pip does end up living in a derelict boxing club underground, the cave thing is still a little bit there as well. Dom, I don't know, there's always music. I don't know where Dom came from. You have to give him some friends. They just arrive sometimes when you don't plan it. You don't sit down and say, oh God, I've got to give my brother, I've got to. But I am interested in the idea of the Irish-English thing, because she is Irish, but she's Protestant and she's Irish, and she comes to London and she's poor, which is not the norm that people expect. And he is sort of more middle class. I mean, he went to boarding school here. He was born in Ireland and went to England when he was 3. And then when his mother died when he was 10, he comes back to a boarding school and is educated there. His brother very quickly got a scholarship in England to study music. And so his brother has an English accent and he doesn't have an English accent. And his brother's very, very British in his way of thinking and very successful in lots of ways. And he isn't. He's just sort of a drifter. He didn't make it as a boxer. And he was never really into it, really. Something happens in the story. Again, it's this kind of idea of chance that he changes. When he's a little boy, he comes across Christmas presents and he likes the look of his brother's Christmas present, a bit of sibling rivalry. It's bigger and it looks more interesting, and he changes labels, and therefore both of their lives change completely because of this.
Yeah, which is a brilliant idea. It's brilliant. Millie arrives in London, and Peter and I, we were both reading the book together, and we're going, it's amazing the way you get into the life of the pub. You really enjoyed it, Peter, didn't you? That thing about the pub, and it's a very central part of the book, isn't it?
No, totally, yeah. No, and it's this thing of like, yeah, she's there. I mean, it's her, like she's coming, as you said, like she's coming from a kind of difficult position in Ireland. She's poor. She doesn't really know what she's going to do, and she kind of ends up half by accident in this pub, because a fella kind of points her and says, "Why don't you try this kind of pub up the road?" And obviously, the life of the pub is then becomes, as I was saying, a major part of the novel's effect, and it's like a microcosm of London life, also the life of the Irish diaspora as well, the men and women who fill it night and day, and all the rituals that we see of kind of serving and cleaning. And I just wonder, did you enjoy creating all that, kind of the banter, the chat, and the work of the actual pub itself, which is at the centre of everything?
Yeah, work always. I like work. I'd like to write more about people's jobs. I think it's kind of interesting to people, how they behave and work and what they have to do and all that. But I mean, from the time I was a child, I spent a lot of time in pubs and behind bars and going to visit the woman in the house who bring me up and give me my dinner and all that kind of stuff. And I was sort of a companion for my father. He'd go to several pubs during the day, in the course of the day. And he was a daytime drinker, and, and I would go with him, and I would always find my way behind the bar. So I knew what it was like, and I was fascinated by it. And I know the sound of your feet on the wooden floors and all that. And then when I got the job in the pub in London, I mean, I did as Millie did. I spoofed my way in and pretended I'd loads of experience, and I'd none. But they don't care in England. It's not, at that time, it was a vocation almost to be a barman here. You had to have your apprenticeship, and you had to, you do your time before you were allowed near a pint. But I went in, I'd seen so many pints being pulled that I was able to bit of carry on, give it a go and let it settle and all this, like the Guinness ad, let it settle and wait. And it became a thing in the pub that they all wanted me to pull their Guinness. They would only allow me because they felt they were getting a better pint. And I was only chancing my arm, the same as she does. And a lot of people go and take jobs in pubs because you get the accommodation and because it's easy to do. Actually, I got a taxi the other day, and the guy started just talking to me about London. And I didn't mention the book at all, but he was in London. He was sort of saying about these fellas who complain about not getting work. They should go away. I did when I was a young fella. And I went into a pub and I said, "Give me your cheapest pint of lager." And your man said, "What are you doing?" "I'm looking for work." He said, "Would you fancy working as a barman?" "I'll give it a go," he said. He said, "You get accommodation, all this." I ended up telling him about the book then because it was such a coincidence. And lots of people do that.
Well, from cleaning glasses, I mean, I do think you really captured that pub really well, and long passages about the work and the cleaning and all that. But from cleaning in a pub to one of the greatest poems of the 20th century, it's T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which you mentioned earlier, a metaphor for Europe after World War I. It's a poem about trauma and collapse, personal and global. And I was thinking about that idea of the personal collapse when I was reading the book. And it's this poem that Pip goes back to at various pivotal moments in his life. Everywhere in London, you write, he finds connections between the poem and the small coincidences that make up his day and all the other days of his life so far in this unforgiving city. So I know you've spoken earlier a little bit about The Wasteland and how, you know, you got that shot by just sitting in the theatre and hearing Fiona Shaw. But I know personally you yourself, Christine, love The Wasteland, don't you? And is it a poem that you've always loved? Were you always thinking, I'd love to get that into a novel? Because you did it quite well. You did it very well, weaving its way in through the book. You know, it brought me back to it again, actually, which was very nice.
No, I'd love to say that was planned, but what happened was during lockdown, I was worried about a lot of things, as many of us were, and to calm my mind and stop panicking. I've an autoimmune condition, so I was an extra risk. And, you know, my daughter was in having a baby and she was on her own and her husband wasn't allowed in and all this. And it was all very harrowing. I started to learn The Wasteland off by heart. And I just add a little bit to it, you know, every night, and I'd learn it and it'd calm me down. And, you know, I'd read it a few times and loved it, but learning it is a different thing. It kind of enters your body. And then I began to notice in the book, there's a scene in the book where he's remembering running when he used to train, running by the side of the river and seeing the ghosts running. And I thought to myself, oh God, it's the Wasteland starting to leak into this. So I said, I know what I'll do. I let him do the same thing. So I gave him my own experience of learning The Wasteland. And it became a thing in his life to soothe him as well.
It's beautiful to see it in the novel as well. So I was just wondering, would you read a bit for us now, an excerpt from Our London Lives, which shows Pip's, it's very hard to say that. Sorry, which shows Pip's passion for The Wasteland. I'd love to hear it, Christine.
Okay, well, he learnt it off by heart. Just to say, this is sort of shortly after the Grenfell Tower, which had a big effect on him. So, and he's trying to recover from the shock. He wasn't he was just lived nearby. He wasn't in the fire itself. But anyway, in early July, he comes across The Wasteland again. He finds it in the bottom of a Sainsbury bag under the stairs where he must have left it on the evening of the fire. He can remember bringing it with him earlier that day and sitting on a bench in Hyde Park with the book in his hand. But he hadn't gone as far as opening its pages. Just holding it had brought him back to the mid-90s and his time in prison, and he hadn't felt ready to start thinking about all that. The edition in the prison had looked more like a school copybook. There'd been a flimsy, almost homemade look to it. At the back, a few pages of notes by the author. A brown shiny cover, as he recalls. It had been in among a load of old books in the library that had been donated by a Quaker charity. He'd been sharing the cell with an older man at the time, a bald, white-faced blob at maybe the age he is now. The man barely spoke a word, except at night, when he would lie face to the wall, whispering what he could only hope were prayers. The lack of conversation had been a relief, although there were times when the whispering spooked him. As he lay on the top bunk reading The Wasteland, he could feel a breeze passing through his head. The poem wrapped itself around him. Sometimes he had to get down from the bunk and stand at the small window to think about a line or a section he had just read. At dusk, a blue-grey light came off the stone walls and across the prison yard. The violet hour, he realised, could come on wherever you are. At dawn, the light was more of a silvery grey. He felt the poem had helped him to notice such things. He never wanted to stop reading it. He wanted to leave the last shanty and go straight back to April. But in prison, he couldn't very well walk around clutching a book of poetry to his chest. Instead, he decided to carry it around in his head. Learning it off, he built it up slowly, each day adding another bit on before going back to the beginning to consolidate what he had so far. He went over and over it until 433 lines later he felt he had it right, every word and every silence. He even learned the epigraph off, never mind that he had no idea what it meant, much less how to pronounce it. It lifted the excruciating boredom of prison life. It awoke his senses and changed his attitude to everything. From the appalling stink of the morning slop out to the chorus line clang of slamming doors in the evening, everything seemed relevant somehow. Everything just as it should be. Nothing bothered him so much then. Not the desperate late-night yowling of grown men behind locked doors. Not even the whispering voice in the bunk below him. Everything he saw, heard, smelled or felt became the language of the poem he was now living through. It got him past the first part of a stretch anyhow.
Oh, thanks, Christine. That was lovely to hear. And of course, the epigraph that Pip learns off by heart, written in Latin and Greek, but translated into English is, "For once I myself saw with my own eyes the Sibyl of Cumae hanging in a cage. And when the boys said, 'Sibyl, what do you want?' she replied, 'I want to die.'" It's beautiful language, isn't it? It's lovely to hear that. Yeah, thank you, Christine, for that.
We were kind of mentioning earlier, I mean, this is a big book. And, curiously, I suppose as a reader, I felt that the size of it made me take my time reading it, kind of slowly becoming involved with the lives, with all the lives that you created. Of course, we've had big Irish books in the past. I mean, I was thinking, like most recently, there's been books like Paul Murray's The Bee Sting, for instance. I was wondering, obviously, did you intend the new novel to be long, or did it naturally evolve to be what it is, that kind of expansive narrative that stretches over decades?
It just happened to be that way. I mean, there were times when I would go in and I would say to my husband, "Jeez, is this thing ever going to end?" It's just, there was no, it was no right way to end it, I think. But I just felt, but mostly I just felt it was right to do it, just to go with it and let it happen as it happened. And maybe COVID as well, lockdown naturally slowed things up. There was no hurry for anything. And I just felt I really wanted to be a fly on the wall in these people's minds and their hearts even, that sounds a bit corny, but I did want to know them really, really well. And the city was the backdrop, and it just took the time it took.
Yeah, I think I felt very much like Peter as well. Like, we're so used to plot-driven novels, whereas, I just eventually learned when reading this book to slow down and just take your time with it and get into the world of it and the world of the characters. And once I gave myself that permission as a reader, I was so happy. I mean, I was even chatting to you saying, I'm still reading it. I'm taking my time.
Good.
But it's lovely to do that, I think, isn't it? And just enjoy it.
I think it is. And a lot of the old books that I love are ones that you have to take your time with. And I feel, reviewers are not going to be very happy because they're looking at a big slab of print that they have to read for the same amount of money that they, a small book would pay for them, and they have to put a lot more time into it. But I think too, and it's sort of a little bit daring to do it because as the attention span shrinks by the year, I'm now asking people to expand it again, to stick with it. But some people like it and some people won't. But a slow read is no harm,
I think it's nice. Anyway, Paul Murray has warmed you up for the readers up for you anyway. But I have to say that I haven't read such a good novel in ages for its ability to profoundly uncover the hurts that are so intimately a part of ordinary lives. I think really when I closed the book, I think that's what it was about. Like there's love, deception, betrayal, but then questions come. How can we be honest with the ones we love? How hard is it actually to forgive those who have wounded us? And Millie, she does forgive ultimately. And despite everything, I hope I'm not giving anything away, she feels happiest when Pip is close by. You might disagree with that, but that's what I felt. And I thought it was very tender and touching. It does actually beautifully come full circle. The anticipation, though, is still palpable. And I, as a reader, I kept hoping that Millie and Pip would at last find comfort in each other. But you keep us guessing right to the very end. Was that your intention? Or is it just you just didn't know?
I just don't know. I just don't know, to be honest. But what I wanted to do was to have Millie, after all she'd been through, I wanted her to, be independent, that it was okay if one thing happened. Yeah. It was lovely if the other thing happened. And I wanted her to have learned a few lessons from Mrs. Oak. Mrs. Oak is her boss, not that much older than her, who is ultimately a very selfish woman. But she has probably had reason to be, but she's very strong and independent. And she, too, sort of used Millie in certain ways for her own, out of her own selfish reasons. And I wanted that to her to have learned, taken something good out of that, which is to stand on her own 2 feet. And she realised she can do that if she has to.
thanks very much for coming in to talk to us today about your new book, Our London Lives. It's been a great pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, it's been really great, Christine, because it's wonderful as well. What a luxury to read the novel and then meet the author. We're so lucky, Peter. Wonderful to chat to you, and good luck with the launch tonight. It's September the 5th. It's Hodges Figgis tonight at 6 p.m. And we would love now if you wouldn't mind reading us out with another excerpt from your book. And if you wouldn't mind leading us into it as well, Christine, we'd love to hear it.
One of the things, I stayed in two different flats while we were over there, and one was in Westbourne Gardens, which is mentioned in this place, and the other one then was in a little bit further away. But that whole area is kind of interesting because you walk one way and you're into Notting Hill, where everything is Botox looking, even the trees and the streets, everything is just sort of, and then the other way you start to get in where it's more multinational and there's more poverty. You can start to see the poverty as you go down towards the edge of the road. And I just found it very interesting, and I think it's nice to look at a contrast. In this piece, Pip, who is a recovering alcoholic, and he is trying desperately in a way to recover. And he goes to AA meetings now and then, and he hates them because he finds it self-indulgent, and he just finds them really difficult to put up with. And he hasn't spoken at one yet. And in this particular scene, he's trying to put in time because his brother Dom and his new, as Pip finds her, insufferable girlfriend Kim are having a dinner party, and he doesn't want to be dragged into it. And he's trying to just sneak back into the house, up the stairs to the room he's staying in, without them noticing him. But anyway, this happens before that, on the way home. In the small late-night Sainsbury's local, he buys 2 egg and cress sandwiches, a packet of hobnobs and a carton of milk. Then he stands at the end of one of the queues. Under the brutal glare of supermarket light, he studies his fellow shoppers. Most of them middle-aged or older, all of them buying their few bits for a solo supper. Coming from work, or by the look of most, the pub. But going back anyhow to an empty room to face into the lonely weekend, maybe. The clock behind the till reads 10:30. 10:30, Christ, is that all? How long a day is without drink. For all the hardship it may cause, it does at least help to get rid of the day. And even if you don't speak to anyone, you're there under the same roof as others. You're there as an equal. For better or worse, you're part of something. Maybe that's why so many people go to AA meetings. Not because they're looking for forgiveness or a way to understand the whys and wherefores of their drinking, but simply because it's somewhere to go. A place where you'll be spoken to, looked at, listened to, where you will hear the sound of your own voice speaking and think, yes, that's me. I exist. I am alive. If he ever does stand up to speak at a meeting, instead of frightening the shite out of everyone with his tale of the burning car, he could say something simple, something honest like, I miss the pub. I miss it more than I miss the drink. I miss walking at dusk towards the light in the window, the rush of noise and heat as I push the heavy door in. I feel lost without it. Homeless, even when I have somewhere to stay. I feel like I'm dragging the hours around. My arms are too long, my hands too big, nothing feels or looks right. I just don't fit anywhere. Unless something changes and changes quick, I'm that close to going back on the drink. He moves up the silent queue. If he had his own place, a place to come home to in the middle of the day, to cook in, to clean, to put his feet up, read a book, watch a bit of telly, somewhere to make a cup of tea in peace, a window to look out of. He shuffles up a space. Only one more to go. The young bloke ahead of him, hardly more than a teenager, is holding things up, fiddling around with coins, searching in his pockets, patting them, dirty, frantic fingernails. Sorry, the cashier says, but you're 50p short. He peeps over the bloke's shoulder, a small loaf of bread and a tub of margarine. Oh, the bloke says, beginning to turn. Oh, I suppose then I best... He takes the 50p piece out of his own pocket, leans across him and places it on the counter beside the till. Thanks, mate. Oh, thanks a lot. I walked out without my wallet, see, and... He dismisses the thanks with a wave of his hand, then looks the other way as the bloke turns towards the door, the sole of one shoe flapping underfoot. Outside, 2 beggars squat on each side of the doorway like a pair of Lombardy lions. They are waiting, as he has waited himself, for a member of staff to bring out the unsold remains of the day. From the corner of his eye, he sees the old Indian woman is already in situ across the street under the canopy of the old cinema, hooked over her wheelchair, begging bag looped into the handle. The only people he has ever seen come near her are charity workers she completely ignores, or sentimental drunks who fill up her pouch. He looks up and down the road. There are few people out and about now. The restaurants have all emptied out, post-work drinkers long since gone home. He glances up at the windows above shops and offices, then at the occasional parked car or van. Someone is watching over her, he reckons, from a safe distance. Watch her well, he thinks, and then scuttles across the road. He passes into the silence of Westbourne Gardens, all in darkness. As he nears the end of this road, windows full of light begin to show. Even at night, there is an airbrushed look about these streets, every house brought to its utmost. It reminds him of the road Dom lives on, where the residents barely look you in the eye when and if they bother to say hello to you. And yet they have no trouble keeping their curtains open at night so the world and his wife can gawk in at them having their dinner. And who are these people anyway, he has to wonder, sitting in there surrounded by the props of their privileged lives, with their oversized paintings on expansive walls, their marble-topped kitchen islands. That one in there fiddling around with her elaborate coffee machine. Or him next door with his refrigerated wine cabinet on display. Or the house on the corner of Talbot Road where he sometimes sees a frilly-capped maid open the door to the Ocado man. Just who the fuck lives like that?
I think we've reached the end of our Books for Breakfast podcast this morning. I'm definitely rushing off to have more coffee. And I'm Enda Wiley and I have Peter Sirr here with me. And Peter, would you like to tell everyone about the details of the podcast if they'd like to listen again?
Well, you can subscribe at all the usual sources, Google and Apple and so on. And if you want to check out the notes that go along with this podcast, you can go to booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. And yeah, so
we'll be back again. We'll have the toast on, we'll have the kettle boiling, we will have more books to discuss, and we're looking forward to having you here. So goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.